This is the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles.
Let's jump right into it, Greg. This week, we're talking J.C. Jackson. A lot of comments to Phil Perry of NBC Sports Boston coming out yesterday. Of course, the franchise tag window is now open. I believe it's March 8th is the deadline. What are the Patriots going to do with J.C. Jackson? We have options. Let's start with the first option. They can let him walk into free agency for a 2023 compensatory pick. How do we feel about that option? And how do we feel about what J.C. said yesterday?
All of what J.C. Jackson said to Phil, I mean, none of it surprised me. I mean, that's sort of where they are. It's the way the Patriots do business. I mean, they're not one of these teams that are going to be one of these needy teams that are going to be checking in and being like, hey, we love you and this and that. And, so that turns off some guys, but they're about their business. And most NFL teams are that way. I mean, basically, they're getting through the season. They're going through staffing changes. The combine is next week, and I will be there for part of the week. So I'll be able to catch up with a bunch of people and, hopefully get some good intel of what's going on. But, really, free agency doesn't start until I think it's the 14th. And the tampering period starts around that time. It's not unusual that the Patriots aren't saying anything. I mean, They're still probably formulating their plans. So if JC's taking some sort of personal affront to that, I think that's an error. That J.C. Jackson said that the Patriots wanted to talk extension and he didn't want to during the season. That's not a surprise either. Once the season started, J.C. Jackson was basically betting on himself, and he's so close to unrestricted free agency. Why would you suddenly take a contract extension that certainly wasn't going to be top of the market and blow you away? So, I wasn't surprised by any of those comments. As far as the options, a couple things people need to keep in mind. If the Patriots tag J.C. Jackson, he gets paid $17.3 million next season for one season. If they do take that avenue, you have to look at it basically by 2 years, because after that season comes up, you're back in the same situation again. So are you comfortable with tagging him again, which would be 120% of that? So it would be $20.8 million in 23. And so that basically, the reason I'm pointing that out is because any contract with J.C. Jackson has to start there at $38.1 million for 2 years guaranteed. It has to start there because that's the threat of the franchise tag. So, when we start to look at options, letting Jackson walk for a 2023 comp pick, and also keep in mind that when it comes to comp picks, so if the Patriots are going to get a 23, say third or fourth round comp pick because of J.C. Jackson, and if he signs for top of the market, it's a third round pick. They would have to not sign somebody who is comparable, so they can't stay in that dollar range.
Right.
So any dreams that you have about, Devontae Parker or some big, wide receiver, say, 15, 16 million that you want to bring in here, you can't do it if the end game is to get something for J.C. Jackson. You would have to go to the secondary market at receiver, which is fine, which is normally what the Patriots do. But it's something to keep in mind. So it's not a definite that they would get a 2023 third round compensatory pick for letting J.C. Jackson walk. So I wanted to make that point. I think this is the least likely scenario right now, or at least when I did my column at BSJ, I thought that I put it at about 5%. We're going to have more on that coming up because I heard from an NFL source who brought up some interesting points in terms of J.C. Jackson and the Patriots, and we'll get to that sort of at the end, because I would say this is sort of a fifth option for the Patriots, or at least a fifth approach with J.C. Jackson. But for me, look, the downside, the big downside to letting J.C. Jackson walk with no compensation is they just did this with Joe Thuney.
Right.
And, actually it was worse with Joe Thuney because they tagged him for $15 million. paid him $15 million to play really well in 2020 when the Patriots stunk. So they, instead of just letting him walk and getting the comp pick, which they would have gotten this year, and had another $15 million to spend, they panicked and tagged Joe Thuney. And so, that's sort of the background. But also, you have to look at, what do they have at cornerback? And that's the big thing here, Nick. And we talked about it when Stephon Gilmore got traded. The Patriots, in our estimation, probably not in theirs, have painted themselves into a corner where, what do they have left at cornerback? If they let J.C. Jackson walk, they have Jalen Mills is now your number one cornerback right now. Jonathan Jones is coming back from a serious injury. Jawan Williams is still on the roster. He's not going to do it. Shaun Wade is a guy that they traded for Baltimore last year, basically a developmental guy. He would probably be the new Jalen Mills, so to speak, if they let J.C. Jackson walk. And so you look at it, if they want to play good man coverage, which we've talked about, the need to do that next year and how they got exposed this year, you're missing a huge piece of the puzzle without J.C. Jackson. And, that's what makes it a less appealing option for the Patriots to let him walk because, what are they going to do at cornerback? I mean, yes, They could draft somebody in the first round and he's going to have to play right away. That's a tough call, but their options are very limited there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need J.C. Jackson with how thin your secondary is. And if you go into next season without J.C., it's going to be a big, big problem on the back end for sure. We don't even know about Devin McCourty. We have some other questions. Jalen Mills, I'm not big on him from the beginning as a 2. So they need J.C. Jackson to help solidify that secondary. The second option is sign him to an extension, Greg. How do you feel about that one?
I just don't see it. I don't. One of the big things is, and fans and a lot of the media don't really talk about this, Nick. When it comes to giving a guy his first big contract extension, this is not exclusive to J.C. Jackson. This is part of the calculations on every single player that comes up for their first big contract. Is the teams have to ask themselves, how is big money going to change this player?
Right.
Do we trust this guy?
Yep.
Is he going to behave? If we give him $40 million guaranteed, which is just guaranteed, no for injury or skill or whatever, fully guaranteed, are we confident that he's going to keep working? Who was it? Who was the interior guy that they gave a lot of money to in an extension? I forget what his name was. Big guy. Was it Akeem Hicks?
No,
he went to the Saints.
They didn't give Hicks the money when they should have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was one that got away. But anyways, there's this calculation. And look, J.C. Jackson has been a very good player here. As far as we know, there's no reason not to trust him off the field. But this is a guy who went from a mid-round, 3rd or 4th round pick to undrafted because of red flags. He basically got sort of kicked out of Florida, basically, ended up at community college, went to Maryland, behaved himself in Maryland, but still enough teams were a little bit hands-off with him because of his actions off the field that he went undrafted. So for every team, that's part of the calculation with J.C. Jackson. I have no reason to suspect that he will be nothing but a professional if you give him extension. But if you're the Patriots and you're the Crafts and, maybe you're a little uneasy about it. I mean, just look at Aqib Talib. Aqib Talib was an awesome player here. He was better than I thought he was going to be. But he was a guy who was, flaky off the field, injury issues. And when it came time to give him an extension, the Patriots gave him an extension, but it has all sorts of bells and whistles as far as, active roster bonuses and stuff like that. They weren't just going to give him the money. And so he ended up going to, was it the Rams or Denver? Somebody. He left for more guaranteed money that the team just said, all right, we're going to give it to you. So that's part of the equation. That's reason number one why I think the Patriots aren't keen on giving J.C. Jackson a ton of money. I don't know how much they trust him yet. I'm not saying they don't. I'm just saying it's part of the calculation. And knowing their history, they're not just going to fork it over for him. I think that basically when you look at it, I mean, you're talking, like we said, the extension starts with 2 years fully guaranteed at about almost $40 million. Plus the average values right now at receiver are, Jalen Mills is the top at $20 million. $20 million. It basically goes down from there. So right around top 5, if J.C. Jackson thinks he's a top 5 corner, which I think he does, you're talking at least $18 million a year, if not trying to supersede Jalen Mills at $20 million. So I just don't see the Patriots going there.
Yeah, you said Jalen Mills twice. He means Jalen Ramsey. So nobody attacks Greg on Twitter. He means Jalen Ramsey, obviously, not Mills. Mills is not making $20 million a year. Yeah, I don't think an extension is going to happen. I don't see it. I find it almost less likely than letting him walk into free agency. The third option is tag Jackson, plan on him playing, Greg, and then see what happens from there. How do you feel about that?
Well, the first two options I put as long shots for now until we have more of a discussion after the break. This is where I start seeing realistic options for the Patriots. And I put this one as 35%. Tag Jackson, plan on him playing this year because you don't really have any other options. Draft a guy, let him develop. Maybe, a year from now, you have this first or second round pick plus Sean Wade ready to go a year from now. And you let J.C. Jackson walk and you get the comp pick or you do the tag and trade, whatever, depending on what kind of season J.C. Jackson has. I think this is a decent plan. If I'm the Patriots, I'm open to it for a couple different reasons, Nick. Number one is J.C. Jackson's been underpaid his entire career here. So the Patriots could justify, so basically he's made about $6 million in his previous 4 years. There's one thing that I brought up about J.C. Jackson maybe not being crazy about the Patriots and wanting a contract extension here. One of those is that last year, the Patriots made the wise business decision to give J.C. Jackson a second-round restricted free agent tender, which is basically what you get if somebody else signs him to a contract. You let him go. The Patriots had the option of putting a first-round tender on J.C. Jackson, and they decided not to do that. I thought he was worth it. It was about it would have been about $1.3 million more last year to give him a first-round tender. I understand why the Patriots didn't do it. It was the wise decision. Nobody had any cap space. It was good for the team. But if I'm J.C. Jackson, considering I was a starting cornerback for how long for this team, I'd be a little offended that the Patriots didn't just do the right thing and give me $1.3 million more, especially when they were about to spend $160 million in free agency. So I would be a little ticked off at the Patriots if I were J.C. Jackson. But look, again, the Patriots made a good business decision. I think that, J.C. Jackson, you tag him. So basically we're now talking, if you give him if he gets to 17.3 million, you're talking about 23 million over 5 years for a starting caliber cornerback. I'm okay with that. It doesn't look great this year. They don't have a ton of cap space, and they will have to create cap space just to tag J.C. Jackson. There are easy steps that they can do that. But, I could justify that. I just don't like the idea after Joe Thuney walking of letting a guy with value and Tom Brady walking. I don't like the idea of a guy with value leaving my organization and me getting no compensation. So I tag him and then see what happens. If halfway through the season he's playing crappy or the Patriots don't look like they're going to make a playoff run, then I can trade him halfway through, recoup half the $18 million by trading him. Let somebody else have the problem of JC after the tag's over and, sort of move on from there. But at least I know it's the best thing for this team to have J.C. Jackson playing cornerback for it this season. And if I have to overpay, I have to overpay.
Yeah, and when you look at the tag Jackson option, the other part of it is you can trade him for better than a 23 comp pick. You can do that this offseason. You can do that, of course, during the season, as you're saying, Greg. But if you tag him and you play him, then you run the challenge of, if he doesn't play well, as you mentioned, maybe he's playing like a pig for some reason. If he's playing like a pig for some reason, then what's the value of him if you're going to peel him off during the season? It gets a little interesting, but I think you and I both agree that tagging J.C. Jackson is the best way to go here. It doesn't make much sense to give him an extension. I just don't think they're going to do it. And, you've already got him for 4 years. If you give him an extension now, is he going to give you really 7, 8 solid, really good, cornerback one kind of years? I'm not so sold on that. And letting him walk in free agency is much, much less ideal. So, tagging him and seeing how it goes, or tagging him and trading him for a better than a comp pick is, I think, the better two options. I agree with you. As far as, let's say if they tagged him right now and they looked to deal him, Greg, what do you think? You mentioned the whole tender thing last year. What do you think a return could be for J.C. Jackson if he was thrown out there and what was offered to teams with the franchise tag placed on him?
Well, and I went through that, and my number one option, if I am Bill Belichick, I'm eyeing a tag and trade. And I looked back, that it's gone basically crazy in the last 2 years. That, and I have the wrong year on Jarvis Landry getting traded, but there have been 5 tag and trades in recent years in the NFL. You had Yannick Ngakoue went for a second and a fifth. Jadeveon Clowney went for 2 players, a 3rd round pick. Frank Clark and a 3rd went for a 1st, a 3rd, and a 2nd. He got an extension from KC. It would be the same sort of thing, because you have to, in a tag and trade, you have to factor in, all right, well, this new team's going to have to give him a new deal to make it worthwhile for them. It's going to have to be in place. They're going to have to talk to Jackson and his representatives. So you're going to have a good extension in place. D Ford got an extension from going from KC to San Francisco, went for a 2nd round pick. Jarvis Landry went for a 4th and a 7th, got an extension going from Miami to Cleveland. So this has been happening more and more of late. And what's going for the Patriots is that, look, we've seen it all this year. There is a dearth of good cornerback play in this league. Every team has some sort of cornerback needs, even the Patriots. There are not enough to go around. And so if you're a team who perhaps is a little bit more sold on J.C. Jackson off the field, or willing to take the risk, then you say, all right, well, look, I can get a starting caliber cornerback right now, a good starting caliber cornerback at the very least, who could grow to be more. He's 26. He's coming into his prime right now. And so I'll trade with the Patriots, and they don't have the cap space to give him an extension, but we do. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to shoot for the moon, Nick, as far as compensation, but I think I would be happy with a 2nd round pick this year, as opposed to, the other option is letting him walk and you get a 3rd round pick next year. So a 2nd round pick this year is much more valuable than a 3rd round pick down the road. I think I would be comfortable with a 2nd and maybe a later conditional pick, something like that. A 1st round pick. A lot of these teams that you're probably dealing with have good 1st round picks. They're probably not willing to part with those. I would take a top half of the 2nd round, considering what I know I need on my team. I need to go for a cornerback, maybe a wide receiver, maybe a linebacker. I want more picks than the top, 3 rounds of this draft, which this draft is known to be not top heavy, but very deep. So, I think I would be good with a 2nd round pick. And I looked at some of the teams that need cornerbacks and have cap space: Chargers, Jets, Broncos, Seahawks, Steelers, Bears, Eagles, Raiders. And I also looked at the teams right now that are spending $10 million or less at cornerback. Most teams are probably in the $20 million range in terms of what they're spending at cornerback right now. The Vikings, Chiefs, Jets, Seahawks, Raiders, Bears, Cardinals, Bucks. All those don't have very much money, less than $10 million at cornerback for next year. So those teams could justify saying, all right, well, we needed to spend more at cornerback. We needed to bring in more talent. And so I would start with the Vikings, Seahawks, Bears. I don't think the Cardinals have the cap space, but those teams in the NFC, those would be where I would start with a tag and trade with J.C. Jackson.
Yeah, and Davis has an option there with Tampa. Tampa's going to look at Davis and see if they want to bring him back. I believe he's a free agent, and he's been their number one corner. You've got Jamel Dean on the opposite side. So do they want to bring Davis back? If not, then maybe JC is the option there. There are a lot of teams looking for cornerbacks, as you mentioned, Greg. But it also begs the question, like, if there is a dearth of cornerback play, do the Patriots really want to trade their number one guy and put themselves in a tough spot? And, I also think when you look at the compensation, I agree a second round pick would probably make sense. But then the pressure is on Bill and company to now replace J.C. Jackson. And so now you're adding another thing on top of the list of things that you have to address this offseason. And do we trust the idea of Bill going out there and getting a young cornerback? I mean, I would. Belichick has a very good track record with cornerbacks for the most part. So, I would be okay with him going out there and getting somebody, but he's got to make sure that he actually does invest in that position and doesn't go for an undrafted dude and go into the season with undrafted guys, Sean Wade and Jalen Mills. All right, Greg. So you're talking to a personnel executive, and that personnel executive brings up an option that up until that point you hadn't thought of. What was the option, and what did the executive say to you?
Okay, so basically the option is, sort of what Belichick does a lot of the time, which is Belichick puts a valuation on each player, and he'll make him a contract offer, which he probably will with J.C. Jackson, to basically that says, all right, well, this is where we see you. And, I think the Patriots probably see, and this personnel executive agrees. He thinks that they see him as a starter, not as a top 5 corner. So if the Patriots made him an offer, say in the realm of, if top of the market is $20 million, top 5 is probably about 15, 16. It's a little bit of an increase on where Stephon Gilmore was. Stephon Gilmore was basically around $14 million when he was here. Probably, cost of inflation, $15 million a year. That's probably where the Patriots see J.C. Jackson. And J.C. Jackson probably sees himself as a top 5 cornerback. Look at all my interceptions. Look at this. So the other sort of option, the fifth option in this, is what I think the Patriots will try to do, and I don't think it's great, is basically Belichick puts a valuation on J.C. Jackson. He's not going to tag him because he doesn't want to be stuck with that bill. It's sort of like the Wes Welker when he tagged Wes Welker, and Wes Welker got a $9 million tag, and Wes ran to sign the franchise tag because he knew he wasn't going to get that from anybody else. And that pissed off Belichick. He thought they'd get an extension sort of on their level. And they ended up, Wes, see you bye. He ended up signing for $6 million, begging his way to Denver the next offseason when the Patriots snuck in Danny Amendola, gave him Welker's money, blah, blah, blah. So I think the Patriots will, I think the more I think about it, I don't think they're going to tag J.C. Jackson. I don't think Bill can stomach tagging a guy at $17.3 million. That isn't worthwhile there. If he does tag him, it shows you how desperate he is at the position. I think that the Patriots make him a contract extension offer that's somewhere around $15 million a year, probably about $35 million guaranteed. I think it's a fair offer. J.C. Jackson should seriously consider it, but J.C. Jackson will get with his agent, say, nope, we think we're near the top of the market. We're going to go see what's out there. Now, can Belichick get J.C. Jackson to give Belichick basically right of first refusal, which is like, all right, go see what you're worth.
Right.
And then come back to us. And he could match it. That's what happened with like Devin McCourty, Vince Wilfork, where Dante Hightower went out on the free agent market. Go out and get an offer, and we'll see whether we want to match it. And if they're desperate enough, they will match it. If J.C. Jackson's interested in that, I don't know if he will be. But I think the other option is they don't tag him. They let him see what the market is. And the hope is that J.C. Jackson, that other teams don't see him as a top 5 cornerback. He's not overwhelmed by the offers, and he decides to stay here. This is the same thing, Nick, mind you, that they did with David Andrews a couple years ago.
And Dante
David
Hightower,
Andrews was
Hightower was another guy.
Yeah, Hightower was another guy, but this was the same play, and it worked to their advantage with David Andrews. When David Andrews set free agency, he was done with this place. He was like, screw this. They're not paying me. I'm going someplace else. I can at least land with Miami. At the end of the day, and the Patriots said, fine, go see what you get. We don't think it's going to be that great, so, we'll be waiting. And David Andrews didn't like his offers out there, and then ended up coming back here. That's a fine play with an interior offensive lineman, especially a guy who probably has some comfort here and with the coaching and things like that. It's quite another thing for cornerbacks and, other guys of their ilk. These guys, J.C. Jackson has waited 4 years to get to unrestricted free agency. He's probably heard it a lot in the media, heard it a lot from his people. Look at all the interceptions. You lead the league in interceptions, blah, blah, blah. Look at your PFF stats. They're great. You should get top 5 money. And that's what he's going to be set out to do. And if he doesn't get that from the Patriots, I think he takes that from somebody else who maybe has better weather, things like that. So I think that's the option. Now, I came to that because I asked an NFL source from a team who would be in the market for a cornerback. He told me they are not interested in J.C. Jackson. They will be interested in other cornerbacks. He said, I don't think the Patriots will tag him because I don't think they want to pay him like top of the market. They think he's a starter, not a top 5 corner. And he said, better be ready for him to be on your team at that price point if you tag him. So the thing about free agency, Nick, is it only takes one team. It could be, the LA Rams could say, screw it, we don't care what the price tag is, and we're signing the guy. Or, the Chargers or, some deep pocket team that has a lot of cap space that says, screw it. We're just going to sign the guy, and we really like him. And that's all it takes. It only takes one team. The 31 other teams could say, J.C. Jackson's a top 10 quarterback, and we're not going to pay him like top 5. But if one team says, we really like J.C. Jackson, we're so desperate at cornerback, we're going to pay him, then boom, he's gone. He's going to get paid top 5. But I think that it's now coming into form that the NFL at large thinks that J.C. Jackson is going to be overvalued in this market, even though there aren't enough cornerbacks, and it's just how much are you willing to pay? And I don't think the Patriots are going to be willing to go to $17, $18 million a year. So this is going to be a very, very interesting situation.
Yeah, and I don't think it's any mystery what Jackson's looking for. It's similar to Malcolm Butler. Malcolm Butler was up front. Everybody knew he wanted to get paid. And you see JC with, on Instagram putting $100 million on his Instagram post. He calls himself Mr. INT. Mr. INT wants to get paid. There's no doubt about it. I mean, he's looking for the PAID. And so I just, I don't think there's any question that if he has a chance to get top money, he's going for top money. And if the Patriots give him anything less than that, if they offer him anything less than that, then I do think he goes and looks around because he just, and this is his right, and he should feel very good about himself. He'll go out there and check the market. And like you said, one team falls in love with him, thinks he's a shutdown corner, or at least thinks he's a number 1 guy, and that's a position they need. The money will be spent. Before we get to the member question of the day, Greg, just 2 quick questions for you around the NFL. The first one is all the Aaron Rodgers stuff that came out the last 24 to 36 hours. The IG post, he goes on the Pat McAfee show, says there's no decision today. Apparently he did a cleanse and he found his spiritual center and all this stuff. Just your thoughts on Rodgers and the continued circus that he's been involved in.
It's just further like the dude just loves himself and loves the drama. And who knows how this is played. All I know is Aaron's he loves the attention. By the way, like I respect Pat McAfee and obviously he's doing a really good job with his show, but like I watched the beginning of that show and like Are they serious with that show? Like, the cheering and the hooting and the hollering and the like, it's just, oh my God. It's like Bobo radio, but, whatever. The guy's making a lot of bank. So, good for him. Um, but of course, Aaron goes there because there's a comfort level, with like his COVID stuff and other stuff. Like, he doesn't get challenged on anything. He
Right.
basically gets to say whatever he wants. He's unchallenged. It's the Tao of Aaron Rodgers, and he makes us be beholden and wait for sort of every appearance and what's he going to say, and he loves that stuff. He's always loved the attention. Everybody knows I covered Aaron Rodgers very early in his career, even before he was a starter, and I've had a lot of interactions with him over the year. I did want to bring up one interesting thing. Connected to Aaron Rodgers, now that you brought his name up, that I think it sort of intersects with the Patriots. So Bob McGinn, who was my mentor at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, who I worked with, he's now doing the independent route thing. He's tremendous. And I saw something he wrote about how
I know where you're going with this.
About the passer rating and the interceptions.
Yep.
Yeah. And that Bob is 100% right on that. And people have probably heard me say it over the years. Like, I've heard Aaron Rodgers in his locker talk about his passer rating and he could quote his completion percentage and passer rating and things like that. And I'd never heard that from a quarterback before, at least a good quarterback who only cared about winning. And so Bob talked about how, like, Aaron, he thinks specifically against the 49ers that Aaron didn't throw into tight windows, passed on it, as opposed to Jimmy Garoppolo, because he worried about how it would affect his passer rating. Now, I didn't think that watching the film. It could very well be the case, but I will tell you, Aaron started off his career basically saying, I'm going to be the anti-Brett Favre. I'm not going to make it about me. I'm going to be a great teammate. I'm going to get along with my teammates. I'm not going to be reckless. I'm not going to throw interceptions. Of course, he turned into a lot of that by the end. He turned it into Favre exactly, with all the drama and loving, needing affirmation and all this stuff. But Aaron absolutely knew what his passer rating was and would pass on basically, throwing like he ended up doing later in his career, but early on in his career, he wouldn't throw like halftime heaves like into the end zone, worrying about getting picked off and affecting his passer rating. And there were times where he passed on throwing in a tight windows, specifically because he didn't want a cheap interception and that to hurt his statistics. And so when I saw that, I thought of Mac Jones, because we already saw Mac Jones this year. There were a couple times, including the Buffalo playoff game, where I think he had 2 interceptions in that game. But one was like a forced desperation type of thing. And we've seen him do that in other games where he throws it up in double coverage, hoping to make a play to ignite his team. And, I was impressed by that during the year, that you could tell Mac Jones doesn't give a crap about his stats. He probably has no idea what his stats are. Yes, his completion percentage is too high at times. And he's been coached on that sometimes you got to push the envelope a little bit more, and he'll do that as he gets older. But I just thought that was interesting, because I think that Mac Jones in many ways is sort of the anti-Aaron Rodgers, where Mac Jones only cares about winning. I have no worries about that with Mac Jones. He is not going to get caught up in his stats or anything like that. He just wants to win. And if I'm a Patriots fan, I feel really good about that.
Yeah, and I agree with you mostly what you said about Rodgers. And, he's very calculated. It reminds me of LeBron in the NBA. These guys are very calculated with their cryptic messaging. And, LeBron over the weekend talking about other GMs and how great they are and leaving the door open for the Cleveland Cavaliers. And, on the same weekend, you've got Rodgers doing his IG post. I don't think it's any coincidence that it was during NBA All-Star Weekend, when the sports calendar is dead, the NFL season is over, and both guys know if you want to put premium pressure on a team, or if you want to put yourself over, it's a great time to do that, because all you've got to say is a little something and you're going to blow up and everybody's going to be talking about you. And I think both guys are well aware of their status, and they know if they post things, it's going to come up. The Randall Cobb, Devontae Adams photo, when he said, oh, it's just, it made me cry during the season. I'm sure, maybe it did make him cry during the season. But that happened months ago. So, like, if the photo touched you that much in the moment, why didn't you post it in the moment? Why didn't you talk about it in the moment? Now, months removed, you're like, oh yeah, I looked back at that photo and I thought it was the perfect time to post it to show my gratitude. Like, just give me a break with that. The second thing is Brian Flores, hired by the Steelers, Greg, as a senior defensive assistant linebackers coach. I think it's an absolutely brilliant move by the Steelers. I think he's a great fit. I think he's going to help that team defensively. Your thoughts on Flores to Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I love the pickup by the Steelers, and what's interesting is that Mike Tomlin was actually, in certain NFL circles, especially the coaching community, the minority coaching community in the NFL, I think there was a little bit of heat building on Mike Tomlin because until he promoted Terrell Austin to defensive coordinator this offseason, he had never had uh, a black coordinator, offense or defense or anything like that. So here is, Mike Tomlin, one of the few head coaches in the NFL, in position to sort of get some of these guys ready to be head coaches. And, he wasn't being overly proactive about that. And, now he has Terrell Austin and he brings in Brian Flores. And I think it's a great move because Terrell Austin is his forte is more in coverages, and Brian Flores, as we know from his time in New England and also Miami, Brian Flores is one of the most creative front seven schemers in the league. I mean, the amoeba defense here was one of his big things. I think the Steelers have gotten too stale there with their zone blitz, and it's the Steelers. They got to be Blitzburg, and they got to stay, strong to their roots as the zone blitz and stuff like that. When it's like, all right, NFL offenses have kind of evolved since then, and you're not really fooling these guys with the zone blitz as much anymore. But I think that Flores, his ability to put his flavor on the front seven will only help those guys more. TJ Watt and those guys. I think it's a really good fit. I think it'll bring a lot of fresh ideas to the Steelers defense where they really need some. And, so I thought that was interesting. Also, I haven't seen the HBO Real Sports interview yet. I guess it was on last night that Flores did. I guess the noteworthy thing was that he said that he has not communicated at all with Bill Belichick since the infamous text message that he basically used to launch his lawsuit against the league. And, he says that he still has nothing against Bill and he's the GOAT and all this stuff. But it's interesting that both ways, neither of them have reached out to each other during all this. And I would like to be the fly on the wall, and perhaps I can see it when they run into each other in Indianapolis at the scouting combine, because that would be interesting, I think.
No doubt about that. Let's jump to the BostonSportsJournal.com member question of the day. Check them out over at BSJ. $39.99 on the annual plan. Of course, you get all the top-notch analysis. Boston Pro Sports. Bruins go 3-2-1 without Marshy. Pretty good job by them. Celtics have won 9 of their last 10 going into the All-Star break. Very good job by them. But also, if you're a Patriots junkie, which you are if you're listening to this podcast, membership at BSJ gives you access to a ton of video analysis that Bedard does on the coach's film and direct access to him in weekly chats. Greg, you have a member question of the day for us. What is it?
So I actually grabbed this one from Twitter from Ross Inglis, and he it's sort of a good offshoot from the Gilmore, the J.C. Jackson discussion, and it has to do with Gilmore, and it's basically he says 2 names that bear watching in the cornerback sweepstakes: big play Slay, this Darius Slay, who is under contract with the Eagles, and Stephon Gilmore, who is a unrestricted free agent. Despite how it seems like it ended with Gilmore, it's clear BB made him all-world. All right, I don't know if I would agree with that. An incentive-laden deal would bring Gilmore back. Okay, first of all, Darius Slay is somebody that I talked about last year or at the trade deadline on somebody that I would look at getting. He has a big contract with the Eagles. I mean, basically, plus he's getting paid $16 million this year, $17 million next year. I don't know why you would give that to Clay instead of J.C. Jackson, but okay. I still think he's a good player, and I would think about it. But the bigger thing is Stephon Gilmore. Now, Stephon Gilmore, first of all, an incentive-laden deal. Have you not watched Stephon Gilmore's career with the Patriots and his contract stuff? Incentive-laden? Those are like curse words to Stephon Gilmore. No, Stephon Gilmore wants his money, a lot of it, and he wants it up front. That's what he wants, okay? He doesn't want an incentive-laden BS contract. Like, he could have taken that with the Patriots any number of times, and he said, screw that, I'm betting on myself. Now, I don't know how he finished last year. I know he was hurt a lot. But do I think it's out of the realm of possibility that you let J.C. Jackson walk and maybe Gilmore doesn't have a great market and you can get him at, say, $13 or $14 million a year for maybe like 2 years to be the stopgap while you develop more cornerbacks? Yeah, I don't put it out of the realm of possibility, but you got to be top of the market for Gilmore, or at least his market. Will the Patriots do that? I don't know. It's possible. I mean, I don't rule it out at all. But if the Patriots, I wouldn't mind that. I mean, if you let J.C. Jackson walk and you replace him with Stephon Gilmore at a cheaper money, okay, I'm on board with that. It's just funny that, first of all, Belichick did not make Stephon Gilmore. Stephon Gilmore was very talented in Buffalo. He was on crap teams there. The Patriots basically stole him. They paid him a lot of money when they sent in their eyes, or at least was going to be there. And he was, and so, I think it worked out for both. Belichick did not make Gilmore, and Stephon Gilmore ain't coming for any incentive-laden deal unless he's completely broken down and nobody wants to pay him.
Yeah, I mean, I agree on Gilmore. There's just no way he's taking an incentive-laden deal. And as far as Slay, let's not forget, there's history with Matt Patricia, and it's not the greatest of history.
Yeah.
And you wonder, how much that would play a role. What would Patricia have to say about Slay? How does Slay feel about Patricia? There were some things said when Slay was gone that, you do wonder if those guys, they don't send each other Christmas cards probably. So that's something to keep in mind. Well, there you go. A lot of info on J.C. Jackson, some quick NFL tidbits for you as well. He's Greg, I'm Nick. It's the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles. Until next week, everybody be good, be safe, be healthy. We'll talk to you soon.